and welcome to an episode of Box Office Quarterbacks sponsored by Rival Fantasy Sports. Go to joinrival.com/boxofficeqbs for $25 in free play, $10 on your first deposit, and up to a $200 deposit match. I'm Ahmed, and we have a special guest today, my very good friend slash fellow cat daddy and commentator for National Wrestling Alliance, Joe Galli, and we're talking about the latest film, The Iron Claw, starring Zac Efron and Jeremy Allen White. Joe, what is up, man?
Dude, what box office quarterback? It needs to be box office champion of the squared circle. We got to rename the show just for this episode.
I hear that. We'll talk to Jeff.
Touchdown.
So before we get into this movie, Joe, tell us briefly, the good fans, your own wrestling journey. In other words, how long have you been a fan?
Well, I think I've been a fan since I was very young, a kid growing up. A lot of my friends out there, they started watching, during the Attitude Era, the Monday Night Wars and things like that. And so I kind of got hooked in with a lot of my friends that were kind of first into it. And they were always talking about like Monday Night Raw back like when my family couldn't afford to have cable at the time. So I felt kind of left out. And so my journey really does start at like the first episode of SmackDown, which was available on UPN, which you could get back in the day over the air on antennas. Kids Google it. I mean, that's way back.
I remember antennas.
Yeah, exactly. I had to get them.
And
just
I remember
right.
UPN.
Yep, exactly. So that was my first introduction. And then, I've been a fan. And then I got into the wrestling business myself for a brief time while I was going to California State University, Northridge. I was also a professional wrestler at that time. I wasn't very good. And then I transitioned into a career in broadcasting. I got a degree in broadcasting from Cal State Northridge, and I started a career as a reporter, which took me all over the country. I did that for about 11 years. At the same time, I was always doing something in pro wrestling, and I got an opportunity to do commentary for the National Wrestling Alliance at the very, very beginning when Billy Corgan bought the company back in 2017, 2018. And since then, I've been the lead commentator for the brand since then. And now we have a hit show called NWA Power, which is available on the CW app. We've got some more programming that's going to be coming to CW later on in the year. And we got some big shows coming to the Florida area and some other areas down south as well coming up in the very near future. So, wrestling's always been a part of my life, and it's brought me, to know such interesting people, such dynamic people, including some of the folks that are stars of the movie that we're talking about with the Iron Claw, which has a few people who play the Freebirds who also appear on NWA programming as well. So it's really exciting time to be a part of pro wrestling, and it's good to see it as so much part of like the ethos that is just entertainment in popular culture. WrestleMania is always going to be a big thing, no matter whether you have to pay for it on a pay-per-view, it's a premium live event that you get on a streaming service, or you're going to go there and buy a ticket and be in a 100,000 seat arena watching it. So it's always cool to see that, but also to see the different variations and different flavors of professional wrestling kind of being exposed to a new audience out there. And, just like any other forms of entertainment, there are high years and low years, and wrestling is just growing and growing and growing with all the different competition that's out there between, TKO Sports, AEW, us with the NWA, and internationally. It's really cool to see it, and also to see it sort of from this behind the scenes, the storytelling that you see in movies like The Iron Claw and the exposure that it's getting. It's a great time to be in the pro wrestling business. That's for sure.
Well, and we're so happy that you're here to talk to us. And I mean, before this movie, I texted you while I was in the movie because I was just like, hey, I wonder how Joe's doing. But also, I was curious, how familiar were you with the Von Erich family, and how did you react whenever you first learned they were making the movie?
Everybody who's in professional wrestling, especially, I live in San Antonio, and the Von Erichs were so integral to what was the Dallas territory of the time. And a lot of what you see in there and how the matches that were taking place in the Sportatorium and all that parts of that movie show that explosion of popularity for professional wrestling based here in the Texas territory. And the Von Erichs were the center of that, obviously, with Fritz Von Erich running that territory, putting his boys into positions where they could have those big matches and the talent that they had to have those matches as well. So to see where that is in the territory system as it was and how that helped professional wrestling reached the heights that it did, because without that territory system and without it being introduced into people's televisions and to go on stations like ESPN back in the day, you wouldn't be able to see probably a lot of what you are seeing with, Monday Night Raw being the highest rated cable program on Monday nights for, 27 years running, or SmackDown on Fox, and perhaps moving to other places and opening doors like for the National Wrestling Alliance to go to major companies like the CW and have our programming on there as well. So it was that foundation that built upon where we are at these days. And so, yeah, I was very familiar with the Von Erichs, and honestly, anybody who's seen the movie, spoiler alert, it's tragic. Don't expect to go there and see like, oh, fun times wrestling, here's high spots and all that stuff. That family, they talk a lot about the curse of the Von Erichs in that movie, and you really do get to see this enormous amount of pathos in that movie, of just the incredible suffering that this family went through, you know, sometimes as a result of being in professional wrestling, because there is a huge dark side of professional wrestling. And that's why there are shows that show that dark side, like that are dedicated to just showing what's behind the curtain and all the issues that come with this form of entertainment, especially when it comes to substance abuse and injuries and families being torn apart and loneliness. And it's rough. It can be very rough for people. And it was, the story of the Von Erichs is a lot like the parable of Job, if you want to look at it from a biblical standpoint, where it's not just that they're doing these things in the service of God, they're really doing these things in the service of Fritz and in the service of professional wrestling. And so it really goes to, how much can you take for this thing that you love, or at least you're being pushed and being told that you love? And I think that that's what makes it such a monumental success at the box office. You can get people that, have no interest in the sport of professional wrestling. My wife being one of them. She's not the biggest professional wrestling fan, but thoroughly enjoyed coming to the movie and seeing it there.
Well, yeah, I was so surprised to see how tragic and sad it was, almost in a beautiful sense, because it is at the heart a sports movie, but it's really just a family story about familial pressures and trying to do right by your parents. In this case, the father. When you saw the movie, I mean, obviously you were taken aback by how tragically sad it was, but were you prepared for how tragically sad it was, or did you just
If
how
they were going to
surprised
keep
were
it,
you?
if they were going to keep it historically accurate, yes, absolutely. That the sadness of, because a lot of what they get the vast majority of, look, if you look at the movie, it's like the main pillar points, it's pretty spot on to what happened with that family. And of course, there's
Mhm.
always going to be license when you're talking about, anytime when you're talking about a family and you're looking at a time frame of essentially a decade, maybe a little bit shorter than that, and you have to condense it to 2 hours, you're going to get some things, and you have to make an interesting story that ties everything together. But you're really hitting on a lot of what actually happened with the Von Erich family and how they've been able to persevere through that, and at some points not persevere and lose loved ones and still try to continue on in professional wrestling. So it's I knew it was going to be sad, but the way that they captured it, the way that it's filmed, the score that accompanies it, all helps really tie it together. And I mean, who would have thought that in 2023 you'd be going to a wrestling movie and it end up being a tearjerker?
Agreed. You know that scene where Carrie, played by Jeremy Allen White, where he's on the motorcycle. You don't see his face so much as you see the motorcycle, the road in front of him, and in the distance there's like what looks like headlights, and the motorcycle just speeds on and on and on, and then you don't see the crash happen. You just see him waking up, and then there's that, what I'm coining as the oh fuck reveal,
Oh yeah.
where he loses his freaking leg, and it's just so tragic in and of itself. And uh, it was just so beautifully shot and so beautifully executed. What were some scenes that stood out for you?
That one especially, in my notes, it was a perfect reveal for that movie, especially for people who don't know the story. And it's easy for people to kind of forget about it, because if you go and look at a lot of the Kerry Von Erich wrestling that he was doing, particularly when he went to go work for Vince, if you didn't know he was missing, his
We're talking about
shape,
Vince McMahon.
Vince McMahon, when he went to go work for WWF at the time, if you didn't know that he was missing his, leg below basically the kneecap, And if you didn't know that ahead of time, you might not be able to figure it out at all because he was able to hide it so well. That really is a testament to the level of the athlete that he was. And we saw in the early goings of the movie, which is something I forgot, that he was an Olympian and he was,
Mhm.
in the running to go and represent the United States when Jimmy Carter decided to pull us out because the Olympics was going to take place in Soviet Russia at the time. So that's one of all the heartbreaks that happened there. That is one of the smaller ones, but so consequential to what an athlete would be and the mindset that you would be at. To be in your early 20s, you work your whole life, you want to go to the Olympics, you're right there, and Jimmy Carter says, "Go fuck yourself." So
Yeah.
it's rough from that perspective of having to sacrifice that so much, then lose your leg, and then you've got no other skills. You can only be an athlete, so you have to adjust on that. And such a big part of the movie is trying to figure out how to be a professional wrestler on one leg without exposing the fact that you have one leg. Nowadays, there are some people out there that have disabilities that are in professional wrestling, and it's just kind of highlighted. They come to the ring, I'm the one-legged guy, always going to be the babyface because who's going to boo the guy with one leg? And it's just
Yeah.
they get to tell that story, which is a lot different than what Kerry had to do, which was so much more difficult to hide the fact that he was missing a body part.
Right. And we also have to understand this is a different time and everything. And, but Carrie, played by Jeremy Allen White, maybe it's just because I'm biased, but I really like his character. And I remember in the beginning of the movie, the dad kind of says, Carrie is my favorite. So I was kind of already expecting to like him. But it seemed like the movie was mainly taking place from the perspective of Zac Efron's character, Kevin Von Erich.
Well,
Um,
you're going to do a movie about the Von Erichs, you have to do, spoiler alert, you have to do it from the one who lives. You can't,
right.
otherwise the movie's a lot shorter. If you
We'll
pick any of
see.
the other Von Erichs, the movie gets a lot shorter. So you have to pick the one that goes on, ends up opening a ranch in, Hawaii, have the family all live there. And now they actually live in Boerne, Texas, for people who are watching. That's just north of San Antonio. So the whole family's actually moved back domestically. For
Oh,
Marshall and Eric and the two kids that are in the very end of the movie, they've restarted their wrestling career and they've been featured on, AEW's programming and a few other independent spots in the Texas area. So the family is still in the wrestling business, as crazy as it is after going through all that. But I completely agree. The issue is you've got Jeremy Allen White, who is such a phenomenal actor. And I think he just kind of melts into, whether it's this movie or if you watch The Bear, like he's so good and his acting level so high, whatever character he's portraying is something that you're going to be drawn to.
yeah. We on the show, me and Jeff or Gerald, I can't remember because we've done so many episodes, but we did a review of the Bear season 2, and it's just so amazing. But and here's a movie trope. I don't know if it is a movie trope. Maybe I'm coining it. I hope I am. But you can kind of see whenever there's a character that's going to face some sort of demise when they're not given enough screen time. Um, there was another brother who was not included in the film, Chris Von Erich, if I'm saying his name right, who was not included. And it was from what I had done in my research that the script just couldn't take another death. And I don't think as a viewer, I could have taken a fourth brother dying, let alone this own family, going through what they did in real life. But to see it on screen, I think just, I don't know. It's
It's
just,
again the issue you have is you have this family that, again, the parable of the book of Job faces all of this tragedy since the very beginning and has to deal with, what they call in the movie the curse. And if I was in that same position, I would believe it as well, where they have to deal with all this. And you got to shrink it down to 90 minutes, and you paid a lot of money to have Zac Efron as your lead. So you got to
yeah.
make sure you're going to get a lot of Zac Efron in there. So
Yeah.
that's the issue that you have. You can't, as tragic as the film is, does not equal the full tragedy that family has experienced, which is, almost mind boggling.
Yeah. Well, and so with that said, let's try to let's bring it all home with the final ratings. I'm going
Sure.
to give it to you first, Joe.
Well, I'm going to give this an all-star rating for sure. It's a phenomenal film, but I have to be biased as well. My favorite scene is the six-man match that you see with the Von Erich boys versus the Freebirds, because
Hmm.
the Freebirds being played by our NWA National Heavyweight Champion Silas Mason, Brady Pierce, who's been featured on NWA programming as well, as along with Danny Flamingo, who's a fantastic wrestler out of New Orleans. You know, I have a personal connection with those guys, and they did a great job. And Silas Mason, for out there, if you want to Google a picture of Silas Mason, our NWA national champion, and a picture of the guy he was portraying, Terry Bam Bam Gordy, they look very similar. Silas looks like he could be Gordy's son. So it was kind of a match made in heaven there. So it was fantastic in the fact that not only that, but he also knew how to wrestle, which was fantastic there. So, I'm a little bit biased at it. There's a lot of, I work for the National Wrestling Alliance, which is obviously featured very heavily in this because, they were an NWA territory. They wanted to be NWA World's Heavyweight Champion. You see a lot of the belt, which we still use to this day. That same 10 pounds of gold is the same belt that we have currently held by EC3, who's going to be defending that championship in Fort Lauderdale, Florida on January 13th, if you happen to be there, for NWA Paranoia, folks. Tickets available at NWALiveEvents.com if you want to see that prestigious title, which is featured in this movie, continuing on in that lineage and being defended in Fort Lauderdale at a very cool nightclub scene. It's going to be very neat and very cool. But back to the ratings, yeah, I think this is a solid, all-star film. It has points which I think a lot of the wrestling community didn't like. For example, the guy who ended up playing the role of Ric Flair, there's a lot of people who just did not like that portrayal of it, because I think the issue with it is, as good as Aaron Eisenberg is, everybody knows Ric Flair. He's another professional wrestler who has gone way past being, just a part of the pro wrestling scene to being a part of popular culture. And everybody's seen clips of Ric Flair and all that. And so when you're seeing this guy portraying Ric Flair, who's didn't have the size of Ric Flair, and I think didn't get into that Ric Flair. There's a long Ric Flair promo that they shot in there, and it just felt like he didn't quite get to that Ric Flair level till almost the end of it. And that's what I was thinking. I'm like, he's off, it's off. And then in the last 15, 20 seconds of it, where he's talking about the big matchup for the world title, it finally kind of clicked there. So I think that turned a lot of people away from it. But how are you going to make it perfect? It's one of those things of how are you, when you're in a movie and you're going to play Abraham Lincoln, you get some license of like what you can do with it because there's no video of Abraham Lincoln giving a speech. Ric Flair, there's thousands and thousands of hours of him talking. And so it's, how are you going to be able to duplicate that and make it perfect? I don't think it's possible for almost anybody out there.
It's funny you mentioned that. I'm glad I wasn't the only one because, I'm not as familiar with wrestling as you are. But like, I just remember seeing, and so I don't really know too much about Ric Flair, but I remember seeing this actor and I just was like, something tells me he's not doing a very good job as Ric Flair.
I think the part of the problem is he's a little more slight, so it kind of threw people off. And especially when they did such a good job with all of the other casting, like with Silas being Bam Bam Gordy and Brady Pierce being Michael Hayes, they did a great job getting those looks of those other people. Whereas that one just kind of fell a little short, and I'm not exactly sure why. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of got like a little bit turned off with it. But again, I think also you have the, if you're going to be Danny Flamingo playing Buddy Roberts, unless you're way into wrestling, you don't know what Buddy Roberts looks like. Everybody knows what Ric Flair looks. So you have this huge handicap when you're actually portraying another huge celebrity that the entire nation knows what it is. So like that's like you're set up for failure. He did the best he could do, and I think like I said in that pivotal promo scene, he got over there, but it just took a long time to make that transition, and that kind of turned people off at the moment. But it's a movie, folks. You're gonna do as best you can. You can't go into a time machine and get young Ric Flair, and we can't take 77-year-old Ric Flair and have him be himself from 30 years ago. How nonsense would that look? So
sounds like a challenge to me, Joe.
It does sound like a challenge.
I feel bad for whoever has to portray Hulk Hogan in a biopic.
That's who could do that? We could see hours in fantasy book. And then you could see. And here's the other thing: you look at it also like other. If you look at the Rock's TV show, Young Rock, and all that, like the people who play those characters get a lot of heat because they're not. You don't look like the Rock because the Rock looks like the Rock. What do you want to do? It's like that's your option, So it's hard. You're playing this part. The problem is people are so familiar with what they've seen thousands and thousands of hours for. It makes it. I would much rather, if you gave me the choice, like you're going to play The Rock or you're going to play Napoleon, I would much rather be Napoleon. One was way more influential in the world, but at least I could get away with. I could have a French accent, and I will take it
Yeah.
away. But I can't be The Rock. What are you high? Or Hogan or whoever.
Exactly. No, it makes total sense. Well, that's it from us at Box Office QBs. Special thanks to my good buddy Joe with NWA. Joe, you got anything else you want to plug real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Season 15 of NWA Power is available on the CW app right now. So download the CW app. All of the programming on there is free. They've got great movies on there as well. They've really expanded the amount of sports that you're going to start seeing on the CW app and also on CW programming as well. You can follow me on Instagram at Joe Galli. You can follow me on X at Joe Galli News. And we're going to have lots of updates and new programming coming to the CW app, coming to the CW channel. A lot of things are happening with the NWA. And of course, go and see my friends Silas Mason and Brady Pierce and Zac Efron over in the Iron Claw, that movie that's out right now. Even if you're not a wrestling fan, I think you'd enjoy the film.
Oh, everyone knows I'm not a sports fan, but I stand by this movie. That's why I give it, the all-star rating that it deserves. And while you're on the App Store, make sure you go to download the Rival Fantasy Sports app, or you can go to joinrival.com/boxofficeqbs for $25 in free play. Go ahead, everybody. And that's it from us.